Hello and welcome back to another Philfakov video. Sorry if you've been waiting for this upload. I was in Dubai having a great time, and I had actually made another video to upload, but I realized at the end of it that I'd laughed at very inappropriate times. Um, so I was going to go back and edit it, but I didn't get around to doing that. And then I took quite a few pictures over a few days, intending to do it each day, and only today have I gotten around to doing it. And the good news is that I can actually say that what you're going to see today is very indicative of what I've seen in the last week or two anyway. So, I mean, I think it's actually been quite good that I haven't done anything because, as I often say, well, you know, it's like this now, but maybe it was a bit different before, maybe it'll be different later. What you're going to see today is quite a good reflection of what I've been seeing in the past 2 weeks or so, 1 to 2 weeks. And today we're going to have a look at the front page of the New York Times, my personal favorite. We'll compare it with another left-leaning American newspaper, CNN. Oh, it's a media outlet in general. And then also compare it with Fox News. Sorry about the American focus, but you know, I read some news that the EU had allocated 500 million euros for the Ukrainian military, and I also read news that the American Senate, whatever, had allocated 20 billion. So it just it was a very demonstrative example of the difference in influence between Europe and America. And so I think when it comes to the news, most people are interested in the more influential sources. But of course, it's always worth having a look. You know, what are they saying in Turkey about this? And I did have a look at that. We won't cover that today. So just a quick review. There it is. If the front page, the picture, the title is neutral informational, we give it a 0. That's our point system. If it's a bit emotional, we give it a 5. If it's reptilian, making you go crazy because you're sad or incredibly angry, we give it a 10. What's been happening so far? Well, so far we've had a look at the distance from Kiev or Ukraine, and we've also compared progressive and conservative viewpoints. And just to quickly summarize before we go into today's topic, oops, I've just stuffed everything up. There we go. Before we go into today's topic, we've seen that generally speaking, the progressive ones are measuring a bit higher in the emotions, 172, you know, because they've been between emotional and reptilian. Whereas with the conservative ones, which is, you know, basically Fox News in America, England was, I can't remember the name of it, it had that really wonderful language structure. Definitely recommend it, but I can't remember its name. So, you know, it was a bit lower than the equivalent English progressive one, which would have been The Guardian. And overall, like the progressive ones were coming in at 172 and the conservative at 112. So we'd expect to see that trend continue today. But what's going to be interesting today, we're going to compare two American progressive ones. And so I might just make a new line there. Okay, so I've made a new row here, and I'm going to compare those two conservative ones in that special box. And what we would expect it to be higher, the progressive ones, than the conservative one. But which one will be higher, the New York Times or CNN? Like, for me, it's pretty easy to predict. But what about you guys? Like, you know, they're both left-leaning American newspapers, or media outlets, I should say. Which one do you think will be closer to being neutral, informational, the New York Times or CNN? And which one do you think will be closer to being like reptilian? Have you know, place your bets, ladies and gentlemen. New York Times, towards 0, towards 10. CNN, towards 0, towards 10. Place your bets. Let's rock and roll. Let's have a look at CNN first. Okay, there it is, ladies and gentlemen. It's CNN. We're zooming out a little bit. Don't worry, we'll zoom in to look at the detail in a second. We just want to get the general overall view or feel of the front page. And we can see straight away, top left, that's where we go unless we happen to speak or read Hebrew or Arabic. Ukraine claims Russians. There's the title. We're not going to analyze it yet. The picture, people in hazmat suits carrying a body. I'm not going to laugh inappropriately at this stage. So we can see straight away, this is quite emotional. And then, you know, what else is around that? What else is creating some sort of emotional negativity? There's something burning. A closer inspection reveals it's candles. The president of China. And then COVID tests. Okay. And then when we scroll down, what's happening a bit further, we see that it just goes into news and buzz and, oh, someplace you'd rather be, really. You know, sitting there looking at the mountains. Beautiful stuff. Okay, so what about the title itself? Well, what we do at the Philfakov Academy is we actually start with a picture. Simply because I feel that the picture attracts more attention. But in this case, to be honest with you, if you look at the size of the picture and you look at the size of that title, to me the title kind of draws me in a bit more. Okay, so let's zoom in a little and have a look at that title. Ukraine claims. Now this is fascinating, really. Ukraine claims. this is what I love about linguistic analysis. Like, if you've been reading CNN, like, have you seen claims anywhere? What's the difference between claims and states? Well, states means that you should expect this to be true. You should accept this as true. This is like official sort of information from an authoritative figure. If it's claims, it means, well, they say this, but we don't know. And so what we have is Ukraine claims. So Ukraine says this, but we don't know if it's true. Maybe the Ukraine knows what they're saying. Maybe they don't. We need to be careful about this. And so if you have a look back through CNN over the past however many weeks, you probably won't see many times Ukraine claims or the Ukrainian president Zelensky, if I've got it correctly, Zelensky claims. You're far more likely to see Russia claims, because that creates and casts doubt on the actor, the noun actor Russia or Putin. And CNN has been very solid around the Ukraine noun and Zelensky proper noun. Ukraine's also proper noun, but it's been creating doubt around the Russian one. So for me, straight away, that's a big ding, ding, ding. It's like, what's going on? Is this CNN or is this something else? But overall, I applaud the use of words like claims or even states. Like it's quite nice. I think it makes the reader think a little bit more carefully and process the information they're seeing. And so straight away, if we go back to the criteria. The word claims, because it raises doubt, it does move towards he claims. I don't know about that, he claims. It does kind of push it towards, it's not strictly neutral, but it's definitely making us think a little bit more rather than driving us to emotional conclusions about who we should give $20 billion worth of military equipment. Damn it, I'm laughing again. I'm going to stop laughing. I'm going to stop. No more laughing. Okay, and then Russians are suffering significant losses. Now, for me, this is an amazing turnaround in the adjective of nationality, or here it's a group noun, an adjective that reflects a collective noun. Russians are suffering. So that's quite interesting. Like, if you remember, it doesn't matter if it's CNN or the BBC, there's been a heavy emphasis in the titles on Ukrainian suffering because obvious reasons, they're the ones being attacked. But here we have Russians are suffering. Now, it has popped up before, but as the main headline to say Russians are suffering significant losses. And then we kind of look at that, well, okay, well, damn, we really don't know. Are they Ukrainians or Russians? Is that a dead Russian or a dead Ukrainian? And so, again, we've got some doubt because we're used to seeing like dead civilians, dead Ukrainian civilians. But here with the title, we don't actually know. And so even if we want to feel emotionally sad about something leaning in this direction or the other, we're not 100% sure in which direction we should be leaning, okay? So I would say that these type of things, the claims, not knowing like which nationality that person is dead, and commiserations to the family of that person. Hopefully it's not a person. Maybe they've just they're carrying some good lard, Ukrainian lard, and they've covered it up to keep the flies off there. Maybe it's a COVID victim. It's interesting that they're wearing hazmat suits. I don't know. Have you ever seen that before when it comes to people taking someone somewhere in a war? Okay. But anyway, I would give that one there. Russians are suffering significant losses. It kind of really doesn't create negativity about Russians, which is what we've been focusing on. You're probably not going to feel sorry for them if you've been reading CNN. But yeah, it doesn't mean, yeah, that's it. We should get them because they are suffering. That doesn't really fit together logically. So I'm going to give it a 3 as being fairly emotional and a 3 there. It's fairly emotional, but I don't know which direction I'm supposed to be going. So 6, and then because it's the main thing, the main focus of the newspaper, we multiply by 5. I think that might be a bit high. I think I'm going to keep it at 5, but I think it should be a bit lower. Because that has meant that if it happens to be the main story, it can get a really big score, but if it's not the main story, it can be hardly anything. So overall, that comes to 30 for CNN. And we see there all this Russians have lost manpower. If we go down, it sends images of dead Russian soldiers to their families. I'm laughing again, man. I'm laughing again. I'm going to stop. The reason why I'm laughing is it's just such a turnaround. It's shocking. Like the adjective of nationality or the nation that's doing something shocking is Ukraine sends images of dead Russian soldiers to their families in Russia. So yeah, that's kind of the opposite of kind of what I'm used to seeing. And then something quite really interesting, Russification of Ukraine's education system look like in occupied areas. Because education, like I'm in education, for me that's quite fascinating. But there's nothing there that's really about it's quite negative, but it's not raising negativity towards the object of negativity of the recent weeks. Okay, so really worth looking at what's going on around that. You've got like domestic news. There's a mass shooting. So again, this is it. Okay, it doesn't matter if that's a COVID victim there in that picture. It doesn't matter if it's a Russian victim or a Ukrainian victim of war. It's commiserations to the victims of all families, families of all victims of all families. Commiserations to the families of all the victims. It doesn't matter what the reason for that is. But what I really, really want to just pay attention to, this video is going to go on for like 20 to 30 minutes, unfortunately. Or fortunately, in my opinion. You may not appreciate that. That we've got this China shift, and this is what the Philfakov Academy I've just been waiting for. It happened very early on in the Australian newspapers. It's taking a little while in the American ones, but we don't go into predicting, and we certainly don't talk about the whys. But it's not surprising to see something like, if you got the COVID test in China, which is an interesting thematic link. You got the hazmats from the war and the hazmats of COVID. Very interesting thematic link. Good work, CNN. Yeah, chief editor. And there it is. We are the last generation. That's incredibly dramatic. China's harsh lockdowns could exacerbate population crisis. Reopening in doubt. China withdraws. COVID hit economy harder than expected. So, if we're looking at our scheme for saying it, the picture itself, it's quite sunny. There's a little girl very patiently waiting, like we've seen in all the COVID pictures coming out of China. People patiently cooperating with other people. But next to that, we've had some really harsh language, harsh lockdowns. So yeah, China's kind of creeping in the negativity stakes. And if we look to the right, we come over to the right here, we can see something really interesting. Like, we've talked before in the Philfakov Academy about like your schemata, like the associations you have with things. So even though you look at this picture and you see the hammer and sickle, it's just a picture of a hammer and a sickle, you may not react that much. That generally will have very negative connotations, I think, with a lot of Americans, I guess. So that would automatically raise negativity. You could argue the same thing about Xi Jinping, the president of China. We've talked about that before with Putin. Honestly speaking here, I'd give it fairly neutral. I'd say CCP says vote Labour. This is so funny, man. My country's so funny, it's not funny. I can laugh about this one because it's just Australian politics. Yeah, Xi Jinping looms large over Australia's election. So that's wonderful there. He looms large over Australia's election. Wonderful, looms large over Australia's election. There's a picture that matches it. Yeah, what can you say about that, really? So we can see that there are two completely separate stories connected with China. One is about COVID in China, and one's about Australian elections, but it's still allowed, if we zoom out, we see that despite the war in the Ukraine, and despite racially motivated mass shooting in the US, which for a progressive news outlet should be very, very big, we can still see that the China negativity has taken up quite a bit there. So very, very interesting side point, and I think we're starting to shift away from the negativity around Europe and go back towards negativity connected with Asia. Okay, before we move on, Philfakov, my fellow Philfakov linguistic analyzers, this one rocked up at a 30 for Ukraine-Russia. Probably lower than we might have expected from previous analyses. And then we saw there was a bit of a distractor coming out around the China theme there. Emerging slowly but surely from the depths of the war in Eastern Europe. What do you think about the fellow progressive newspaper, New York Times? Do you think it'll be more emotional connected with the Ukraine-Russia? Do you think it'll be less emotional? Will it be a greater focus or less of a focus? Press pause and have a think about it if you want. If not, let's have a look together. And there it is, the New York Times. Sad people, serious people. Yeah, and so you can guess straight away that neither of these big picture stories are related to the Ukraine. You can see that there's another big picture story under that, and it's Australia. Automatically trying to guess which beach that is and why the policemen are approaching these guys with surfboards. What's happening? COVID's finished, really, more or less in Australia, so they're not arresting them because they're not wearing a mask. Yeah, nothing there at all about Ukraine. Now, if we were to scroll down, 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 we will actually get to a story about the Ukraine down here, but that is, having to scroll down quite a bit, so it's definitely not the focus of the front page of the New York Times. Let's have a look at it. It's not going to be a big score because it's not the focus, but let's have a look at the language. And look, the picture straight away, it's negative. you know, look at that poor guy. His flat is in ruins with rubble on the floor. The doors are open, probably broken on his bookcase there. So yeah, it's fairly emotional, but you know, honestly speaking, there's no dead people there. So you know, and I think I'd personally give it a 3. It's making me feel a little bit sad. You know, it's making me feel a little bit sad, but I'm not quite where that girl is. She's probably lost a football match or something like that. But what about you? Maybe you feel a lot more emotional. You know, like that guy's. You know, how's he going to rebuild into the future? You know, what's he going to do? And I think again, you know, I think I'm probably affected by what I've seen in the past few months, 2 months or 3 months. In that, you know, I'm used to seeing a bombed out building, and so seeing like this flat seemed relatively quite nice, to be honest with you. And again, I'm not saying that he's in a good position or anything like that. You know, condolences to him and the problems he's going through. Hopefully everything can get fixed in his life. Okay, so that's the picture. It's a 3. And then we go, setbacks in Ukraine's east force Russia to shift its ambitions. So again, this is really, really fascinating language shift. Like, first of all, I'd just like to point out the complexity of the sentence. If you remember when we first looked at the New York Times, when the war first broke out, it had fairly long titles, fairly complicated language structures, and it meant that you couldn't instantly understand what was going on. And here, setbacks in Ukraine's east, okay, who's that about? We don't know, force Russia. So it's setbacks that are doing something, and Russia is just an object of those setbacks. And then to shift its murderous ambitions, to shift its greedy ambitions, to shift its killing ambitions, there's no negativity there. So it's gone back to being reasonably complicated. And if we have a look at the detail that analysts, Ukrainian officials say, so analysts and Ukrainian officials, so they've gone away from that kind of Zelensky declares, says, promises, to something that's a little bit more, let's say, informational and neutral, analysts and Ukrainian officials. So we're getting quite a lot of idea about the authority. Say, Moscow is aiming to secure a smaller portion of the East. So is aiming to, I don't know, kidnap, is aiming to spread its evil legacy. I mean, some of the language that was being used was quite emotional, quite evocative. This one is very neutral, secure a smaller portion. NATO plans to fast-track the admission of Sweden and Finland. And so that really is what I would call informational and neutral. There's nothing really that emotional. And so I'll give it a 0. And so interesting to see that it comes out at a total of 3, only 3. If it was the main story, even if it was the main story, it would still only be 15. But as we've had to scroll way, way, way down, that's going to stay at 3. And so we can see there, and in fact, if we look at the next one, in Rebirth for NATO, so that's about NATO, Europe unites in face of Putin's intent. Now, intent is very soft. Intent for what? We don't know. Putin's murderous war, Putin's insanity, Putin's craziness. They could have put a lot of different things in there, which have been in these newspapers over the past couple of months. You know, a clear statement has ended an era of European illusions about Moscow. So really, there's nothing there about the threat of Moscow, possible murder from Moscow. It's just an end of an era of European illusions. Like, we had illusions about you, but that's ended now. So very, very interesting for me personally, having analyzed the front pages of these newspapers the last couple of months, in the level of neutrality. It's like the switch has been flicked. And now you have to ask yourself the question, what's actually happening? Are people still dying? We can say, well, almost certainly yes. Is there still suffering going on? Is there still a refugee problem going on? Yes, 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 yes. But there's been a shift. There's been a shift. And like I said, I've been looking at it over the last week. And this is a very accurate reflection. Perhaps it might be higher up, more of a focus on it. But it's been a fairly accurate reflection of what's been happening in the New York Times. So that might be quite interesting for you. What does that mean? What's the significance of this? Why is it happening? I can leave you to answer those questions yourself. But you can trust me when I say that this is fairly representative of what I've been seeing over the past week or so. Okay, so that leaves us with the last one, Fox News. Now, if we're going to use our table to predict, based on previous data that we have collected and analyzed, predicting, looking to the future, we can predict with reasonable accuracy that Fox News will not have any focus on the Ukraine at the moment, because it tends to be a lot less focus in Fox News than in the progressive media. Do you agree? Is this true? Have a think, press pause, come back when you're ready. And there it is. Exceptional heroism. So interesting, like there's positivity. Wow. Positivity as the main story in a newspaper from Fox News. Didn't see that one coming. Didn't see that one coming at all. What on Fox News? Positivity. Okay, anything about the Ukraine? Biden? No. About the price of gas, racist hate crime. So we can see it's fairly prominent there, as in the other newspapers. Abortion, which has been there for quite all week, like abortion this, abortion that. Guns, SCOTUS, abortion again, race theory. And then, interesting enough, a little one down the bottom about, maintain China ties despite increasing tensions. So there it is, that wonderful word that they like to use in newspapers, tensions increasing, looming. Like this kind of threat of things becoming worse, and it's connected to the noun China. Yeah, tensions with the noun China are increasing in American newspapers. Okay, so you have to scroll down a bit to get to a Ukraine story. And let's just have a little look at like what's above it, because it is pretty interesting. Inflation fix bill is flawed. Fair enough. The Democrats, it's flawed. It's wrong. Johnny Depp, of course, it's there. Senator in hospital. Some mayor saying something. New ban. Stars, as you might expect. And then we have to come down here. Shooting, food charity. It's down, way down. So we scrolled all the way down to get to some tiny story there. Let's have a look at what's written. And there it is. Food charity supplies meals to Ukrainians displaced from homes amid war with Russia. Now that's fascinating, really. First of all, it's in the economy. It's like connected with the economy. It's not connected with like war. And again, food charity. The main focus of the sentence is a food charity. So if you remember before, like Russian rocket attack kills, children, civilians, whatever, there's a big switch in the noun and the action that this noun is doing. Here it's not Russia, it's a food charity. What's it doing? It's supplying meals, beautiful stuff, to Ukrainians displaced from homes. Yeah, so there's a big difference between refugees and displaced from homes. Displaced from homes could be because of a flood or some sort of natural disaster. Refugees could be used for like flooding as well, but generally implies war. So interesting enough, like in that first part there's actually no idea of war until you get to the next part, amid war with Russia. But also pay attention to that part there, amid war with Russia. So amid war with Russia, that should be Ukrainian. Ukrainians war with Russia. So it's not about Russian invasion. It's not about Russian attacks. It's about a war with Russia. So Russia's just another object right at the end of the sentence. So you can see here, we don't just have a situation where it's like got to scroll way down. Even when you get to something about the war, the focus is really not on Russia. The focus is on something else here, food charity. And even when the focus was on Russia in the other newspapers, that focus was about Russians dying and Ukrainians sending pictures of dead Russian soldiers to their families back home. So a really big shift in the focus of the sentences and the pictures as well. Like this is just some people helping someone. So this one's just going to get a 0, not just because it's informational and neutral, but because it's way down. And so if we come back to our table, so we'll fill it in there. New York Times is 3, CNN was 30. Which is on the lower end of the scores there that we can see from previous analyses. And then Fox News came out at a whopping 0, which we can see is 0. It did flash up to 80, but it's been very low on the conservative news in America. Very low. And probably one last little thing, guys. Feel free. That's the end of the Russia-Ukraine analysis. But what I'd like to see is like whether or not the score of negativity about China in one of the newspapers is higher than the New York Times negativity connected with the noun Russia. It'll most certainly be higher than the Fox News one. Let's have a quick look. Okay, so it was CNN News, and it's not going to be higher than the CNN about Russia, but it could well beat out the New York Times about Russia. I'm going to give that one, because it's got the hammer and sickle. I think there's a big difference between a photo of the picture of China and the hammer and the sickle, because, you know, we're talking about 100 years now of propaganda, negative propaganda. There's a lot of negative connotations for, particularly, I think, Americans. Not all Americans, obviously, with the hammer and sickle and communism in general. So I'm going to give it a 3 for that picture. Xi Jinping looms large over, and looms large over is definitely negative. So I'll give that a 3. You know, it's actually looms over. He looms large over. So I'm going to give that a 5. It's really kind of looms large over. So it rocks out as an 8. And as you can see, 8 is more than the New York Times on Russia. It came in at 3, and I think that's worth putting in there. I'll put 8 with an asterisk, double asterisk, and that can mean China. So very, very interesting. I think that's the first time in the American newspapers. It's happened in the Australian newspapers. The first time it's happened in the American newspapers that we've got, it can't be yellow, I've already got a yellow. Maybe I can make it red. I've got red, purple. Can I see purple? Yes. Okay. It's the first time we've seen that at least across newspapers, China is now outweighing New York Times Russia and Fox Russia. A very, very interesting moment in the American media where you kind of get this shift of negativity away from one focus towards another focus. And we'll be keeping our eyes on that to come. So I think that's one thing looking forward. We can have a comparison of like negativity towards different countries. Well, yeah, this is a wonderful channel to watch, guys. let's have a look at negativity. But no, in all fairness, if the front pages of the newspapers have positive stories, we'll start to analyze the positive things, like today in the Fox News one. You know, if that tends to happen a bit more often, we'll start keeping that in consideration as well. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed that video today. I'll just reiterate one more time that this is fairly reflective of what I've seen. That there hasn't been much in Fox News focus at all. That there has been a bit more focus in CNN than in the New York Times. And even when it's the same amount of focus, there's a little bit more emotional negativity in CNN. Whereas New York Times has really shifted back to when the invasion initially started. And a lot of language signaling some sort of coming to an end, which is interesting because if you analyze other news sources, that's not necessarily the case in other news sources, but it does seem to be the story being created in the American news. So we'll keep our eye on that one. I hope you guys have a great time and look forward to catching up with you in the next one.